Hi. This segment is about understanding your writing process. And before we even get started, I want to say that I'm not going to prescribe a particular process for you. What's important about the writing process is that you reflect on what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what you'd like to do differently, what you do differently across different occasions for writing. I would also like to have this unit enable you to talk to each other about your writing processes. So perhaps you can borrow an idea from somebody else and experiment with it, and that will help you with your writing process. So again, I'm not trying to prescribe a particular writing process. These processes vary drastically across writers, across writing projects, and across different disciplines. The writing process in general has 4 stages. These are recursive and overlapping stages, so it's not linear and you don't move necessarily from one through the other. But in general, writers usually approach a writing project by thinking about a pre-drafting stage, where you're deciding what it is you're going to write and thinking about your writing project. Then you move into drafting, which is where you're actively writing. Then you might move into revision, which is where you're rethinking what you have to write. And finally, at a certain point, perhaps when you're up against a deadline or you're just tired of a project, you hit the editing and proofreading stage, which is smaller polishing. Here's an example of the writing process and how recursive and overlapping it is. If you're like me, for instance, you might start with thinking about a particular project and then move to, at some point, actually writing about it, but then move back to thinking about it, and then move to revision, and then maybe I often move back to thinking about it again. And at some point, after I've done enough of these cycles, back and forth, and been pretty non-linear about it, I will finally reach a stage where I need to be editing and proofreading. And that's most of the time near when a stage is moving towards its final product. So with the pre-drafting, again, as I said, it's about thinking, reading, researching, planning. There are many different strategies you can use for pre-drafting. One you already tried because it was the timeline that we did for the introducing yourself as a writer to your classmates and me. Other versions of pre-writing include thinking, analyzing, questioning, reading, brainstorming, outlining, talking, journaling, note-taking. Anything you think of that can help you decide what to say for a writing project would be pre-drafting. Drafting is when you're actually writing. And this, again, too, I don't approach this in a linear fashion where I start on page 1 and move all the way through a writing project and have a full, complete draft. You might do that, and that's great, and maybe that's a really effective way to approach the process. I rarely approach a piece of writing like that. But drafting is where you're actually actively writing. Revision, for me, is the hardest and most complicated aspect of writing. It's where you're doing substantive rethinking about what it is that you're saying and how you're saying it. It involves thinking about such aspects as reorganizing, adding material, deleting material, rethinking what you have to say. And then finally, there's the editing and proofreading, which is distinguished from revision because editing and proofreading is about the smaller kind of local changes. I find editing actually pretty easy. I'm not necessarily good at it because I miss a lot of small proofreading changes. I bet you've probably already found a couple errors on the course assignments, even though I've read them so carefully and other people have too. But anyways, I do like editing and proofreading though, because editing and proofreading involves looking at grammar, clarity, spelling, punctuation, sentence level issues, word choice. It's about polishing a piece of writing, and I find that to be fun. Revision I find hard and sometimes difficult because I'm not sure if I'm actually saying what I want to say or saying it how I want to say it. So I tend to spend a long time with revision and less time with editing. Maybe I should spend more time with editing. Again, here are the stages of the writing process. And I also wanted to point out at this time what the writing process doesn't include, which to me is a little more interesting than the 4 stages that I just spent time taking you through. What the writing process doesn't include are how writers feel throughout the process. So for me, generally, when I'm in the pre-writing, pre-drafting stage, I'm pretty happy. I love to think about writing projects, mull over ideas, spend time reflecting on what I want to say. That's really fun. I love to read what other people have written and do research. That's fun for me. The drafting stage and even this revision stage, if I can collapse those for a minute, at this point, generally I tend to probably feel a little unhappy or scared. Somewhere probably at this arrow is when I'm most worried about a particular writing project, because I feel like I haven't thought through it enough, or I'm not ready to start writing, or I don't really like my ideas enough, or I don't know what I'm going to say, or I get caught up in what readers are going to think about what I've said, that they're not going to hear me, or they're not going to like what I said, or they're going to reject what I had to say. And then with the revision, sometimes I'm not totally happy because I feel like I spend too long on the revision stage and I get a little tired of what I'm writing and it's never quite reaching what I want it to say. But again, here with the editing, then I usually get happier. Another thing that the writing process, as I outlined it, doesn't get at are various rituals or quirks that writers have around writing. You might have a particular pen that you like to use, or a particular place you like to go, or you might have to have 2 cups of coffee of a particular kind or tea before you start writing, or you might have to go for a walk for 10 minutes before you start writing. All of those things are really interesting to me anyways, the rituals and quirks that circulate around the writing process. And finally, the third aspect that this overview doesn't get at, that I'm interested in thinking about, are also disciplinary distinctions and how writing processes just vary. I'll just put a wiggly line to show that writing processes vary dramatically across writing projects. I might use one process for writing an email to a friend that's very different than a process I would use for creating a 25-page article for potential publication in a journal. The writing process you use for writing for this class might look pretty different than writing that you're doing for other classes or for your job or in your personal life. And the writing process that I do for scholarship in my discipline of writing studies and English literature might look really different than what my colleague in ecology does for articles in her discipline, or what my colleague in anthropology does for articles in his discipline. So I'd really like us to begin thinking about not just in general the writing process, but specifically about these 3 things. Oops, let's include that too. Okay, how writers feel throughout the process, what your particular quirks are. Maybe there's another stage that you want to include that you think needs to be there that's not there. And then also how it varies across writing projects and across disciplines. So I invite you to please visit the discussion forum and have these conversations, share with each other these more interesting, unique aspects of the writing process. And also please watch the videos of our disciplinary consultants who will talk about the writing processes in their different disciplines.